Hi, it's Todd from Todd's Workshop and Todd Cutler here, and I have quite literally in front of me an armful of knives. Now, when I'm not making videos and messing about with trebuchets and all sorts of things, I actually do have a job, and that is making medieval weaponry. I've got a big market coming up, and I've been busy. So really, this is just a perfect opportunity to talk my way through them. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pick up all 20-something knives I've got in front of me, and I'm going to say something about every single one. It might be rambling, it might even be interesting. Let's find out. We're going to start with quite a simple one here. So we have a bollock dagger. Now it is sort of loosely under a French style, and what I may as well do is explain how I work. Sometimes I make accurate reproductions of pieces, like really accurate. Sometimes I pick different elements. You know, I see a knife and they made mistakes too, and I look at something and I think, well, that's really ugly, but if you put that pommel on it, it would look really good. And as long as the pommel style and geographically fits and date-wise it fits and culturally it fits, then I will quite happily sort of mix and match different pieces, and I don't pretend otherwise. What I end up with is not a piece that is in a museum, but it's a piece that could have been. And that's really what I strive to do. So if we look at this here, this is a mishmash of a few different pieces. The pommel cap on the end is nothing in particular. They did it a lot on bollock daggers. The handle, very stylistically French. This sort of barley twist flute was, you know, a bollock dagger style that the French seemed to like, other people didn't. So if you ask me for where this came from, I'd say France. You got a pretty pan-European shape on here and a slightly weird blade. And again, I nicked this from a different example of a French bollock dagger. So, you know, geographically, culturally about the same. I'll try and be faster on the rest. Rothenberg Collection in Germany, a place I have never been to and I so want to. Rammed full of beautiful, beautiful pieces. Now, like a lot of collections that are put forward or put together in the late 19th century, there are some questions about the authenticity of some of the pieces. A lot of museums have bits like that. And even if it is a sort of a 19th century reproduction, I don't mind too much because the guys there were doing pretty much what I do, which is picking and mixing different elements of different things. Not an exact example of anything, but definitely in the style of pieces that were there. So you have a Latin inscription on the top pommel here, that is the right hand of God. Oh, hell, I've forgotten. I'll put that in the notes. Right hand of God makes power or something like that. Anyway, I'm sure somebody out there will know. And then on the original, these little sections are cut through with silver underneath. And a shouldered blade. So really quite an unusual blade, but again, it's stolen from another bollock dagger of the time, around about late 15th century, very early 16th perhaps. Funny little English Quillon dagger. Now this caught my eye because the original was dated through the Portable Antiquities Scheme, which is a scheme in the UK where metal detectorists can register their finds. But the original was listed as around 1400. I think it was just the guard and the pommel they found. I've done a bit more research, a bit more looking. It's probably around about 1500. But again, that's an interesting point, that museums, collectors, whoever, don't always get stuff right. I'm not saying that I'm right, but my guess is that it's more likely to be 1500 than 1400. Ah, a lovely piece. One in the Met Museum. And again, actually talking of dates, this is interesting because that fishtail pommel on here, that very thin, almost, well, delicate, yes, but almost something visually that you think, I can't really grip that. And this guard, which is almost, again, looks like it's broken. Full guard on one side, half guard on the other. Really typically Landsknecht, around about 1510 to 1530-ish, I would say. So I'd say German, 1510, 1530. Met Museum lists it as French, 1480. Who's to say? Can't say I'm right, can't say they're right. But it's an interesting point of contention. Now the other thing that's a little bit interesting here is I've gone for a green sheath. I don't usually do that. Now one of the things is, and I'm pretty sure about this because a fantastic website called myarmoury.com, fantastic guy on there, Harry Marinakis, who clearly knows an awful lot about leather dyeing. He suggests that leather dye, green leather dye, if I remember you right, Harry, was not really available in the medieval period, or at least used. That you could dye stuff green with leather, but it wasn't colour fast, so it'd go to sort of a dirty brown. Whether they did, or maybe they'd paint them, maybe they never used green, maybe they just had it for 2 months and then it bled. Who knows? This one's green. Ah, monster piece. A Burnware, an absolute lovely piece with a 4-piece eating set on it and a heavily carved scabbard. One of the pieces of here, of course, is a pricker. Now the pricker, it might be an eating spike, it might be a general purpose awl, it might be all sorts of things. One thing we do know is that nobody really can agree on what it is. So if you have a definitive in-period description of what the pricker is and what it's for and how it's used, let us know. We all want to know. The burnware itself, I made a really particular one for a client of mine, went off to the States, based on a piece from a book called The First Book of Fashion. Really interesting book, cataloguing a diary entry of the guy's clothes over about a 40-year period, an original thing with original portraits, and he did it back in the early 16th century. Amazingly interesting. I made a piece for that. The layout of the scabbard I did a little bit wrong. Customer wasn't pleased. Not pleased, but it wasn't quite right for him. I kept the scabbard sheath and remade a set to go in it because the sheath was really nice. So this is my version for sale. So again, it's just an interpretation of what's in the artwork. Interesting about this is it means a farmer's knife. Now clearly no farmer had a knife like this. And so it is another classic thing, like bollock daggers, for instance. They start out as one thing, being a peasant's weapon, peasant's tool, and they become high status, like, you know, that is very much a high status piece, whereas the first dagger I showed you, very much low. This is so far from a farmer's tool now, it's ridiculous, but that's what it's called. Another pick and mix example. This has a pommel cap, Madonna and Child, which is based on a piece, I think, in the museum, the Army Museum in Paris. And then the rest of it, but it was on a bollock dagger, I seem to remember. I've been doing this for a long time, and in honesty, I forget my sources sometimes, where stuff's come from. I know that once upon a time it was right, but sometimes I struggle a little to remember. But I'm pretty sure that's the Army Museum. Can't remember where I got the body of this Rondel from. And then the blade is actually very thin, very nasty reinforced tip. So this is really, it is a Rondel dagger for business. It is for getting through armour, it is getting through cloth armour, mail, it is for not breaking. This is not a thing that you just have for show. It's nice, it looks good, it is not just for show. This is a businessman's tool. Next one, English Rondel. Now this is mid to late 14th century. Now you can tell that because you have the Rondel guard at the front, and you know it's English because you have this sandwich in here. It's a really typically English thing of metal, organic metal. Boxwood handle. So many dagger handles of boxwood. It's just really hard and dense, tough. And then you don't have a top disc like later Rondels. You've got a pommel here, which that really dates it sort of, you know, last quarter really of the 14th century. Long hologram blade. Curiously, and it is weird, the things you find out in my job, this one is going off to Switzerland eventually. So it has to have over a 30cm blade, and then he can use it in public for displays or whatever. Under that, it's viewed under Swiss law as a concealable weapon. And so I don't know if he can have it at all, but if he would, then it would be permitted. So it's just one of those funny, quirky little laws that you find. Next up, another bollock dagger from the Rothenberg Collection. They really have got some spectacular stuff, and I must get myself there one day. Long hologram blade, double-edged diamond blade. Can't remember exactly what the blade type was like on this one originally, but it might look delicate, and it might look very, very courtly. But it is definitely all knife. But actually, I'm going to go back to the first Rothenberg one and just say something about this. That was not the original blade that was on here. The original blade is really curious that's on this dagger, and it starts rectangular with a sort of an Art Deco form, goes square, then goes through 90 degrees and square again. At no point on it is there a cutting edge. So the original of this dagger is absolutely for stabbing. There is not a cutting edge on it at all. So I'll put this Rothenberg one down. And next we have this Quillon dagger here, which is very typically mid to late 14th century in style. Downturned guard there, wheel pommel, double-edged blade, and whatever that is, 22 centimetres, 9 inches, something like that. Not stupid long, not stupid short. So it's a handy knife to have in a fight, which is exactly what it's for. And it's such a successful format that it just lasted. So certain daggers like Rondels or bollock daggers come in and then out of fashion. Quillon dagger really, from the inception that we know of in the modern medieval world, so around 1080, there's a a painting on a church wall in Italy, really through pretty much now until the modern day, the format has remained the same. You don't see a soldier in the modern world now equipped with Rondel daggers. You do see them equipped with Quillon daggers. They last. Next up we have a pair of Rondel daggers from the Wallace Collection. Now these are very interesting pieces. I'll put one down because they're both much the same. Walnut grip and ebony grip on this one. I can't actually remember what the original was. I think it might have been ebony. But what you have here is a long, and I mean long, stout, hollow ground, single-edged blade. Nice little bevel at the back, funny little hollow ground cutout at the back of the blade here. And then, again, a typically, well, early 15th century shape with sort of like windows in it, a little bit Gothic-y. That fits the age of this dagger well, which is around about 1400, a bit after. A real working dagger, man-at-arms type thing. You know, because it has money to it and it has solidity to it, but it's not super flash, so it's not very high status. But then what is really typical about a dagger like this is you have these very big rondel discs, probably bigger than normal actually on here, but they're hollow. Because if you looked at these and they were solid, you'd know this thing weighed a ton, and they just weren't like that. So any big chunks of metal like this on dagger handles almost invariably will be hollow, and these ones are made hollow as well. Then a curious grip, because you actually have a slab tang through the middle of the dagger, which is, you know, relatively unusual. Bronze little plates, and then sandwiched between, in this case, ebony, with a nice little beautiful decorative rondel. So a lovely dagger, absolutely iconic. And what's particularly rewarding for me about this is I can go to the Wallace Collection, I can look at the original, I can photograph it, I can measure it, and I can reproduce it. And I can learn a bit about how they're made, you can learn from how they're used. But I'm going to contrast that a little bit with this one now. And I'm going to bring this point up because it is an interesting point. So this is a baselard dagger, again, a massively iconic piece from the Royal Armouries at Leeds. If we look at this here, we have a pair of twin fullers coming down, long blade, I can't remember off the top of my head, sort of like 33 centimetres, something like that. Boxwood grip here, really, really thin grip, and really thin little flanges here. And I'm pretty sure that the way they made these is that they hammer out the whole knife, then they slit up here, slit down there, slit across, and then those arms are bent out. And that's why you end up with this very, very thin handle here. Now what's also interesting about this piece is I can't go and look at it. And what I mean by that is the Wallace Collection, most museums actually have a very open, very liberal attitude to you going to see things. And it's really important for people like me because I learn. And when I learn, then hopefully you learn as well. It's a real privilege, but it's also necessary. The Royal Armouries controls their access really tightly, which means if I want to go and look at this piece and measure it, I have to sign a form saying I can't reproduce it, which makes it really difficult. So as an example, this is another dagger of theirs. I have spent a long time collecting as many photos as I can of this piece, as many dimensions of this piece, and I can make a pretty good reproduction of it. I could make a better one if I could see it. So now, it's lovely, and it's a reproduction of that dagger, but it's not really that dagger, and I'd love to really make that dagger, but I can't. I can't do that. It's a real shame. The next one is this dagger here, which I think is French, I think around 1400, I forget now, but actually if you go to myarmoury.com again, this is featured on their features page about rondels, so there's more information about it there. But what's curious about this one is, again, this very strange blade form. It wasn't on the original of this knife, but again, I've just lifted that blade form because it's interesting from other knives. But the 14th century, particularly in eating knives, and then going through into the early 15th, but then really taking off in the 15th century, is an age of experimentation with blade forms. And all sorts of weirdness is going on. Why somebody thought that was a great idea? I don't know. Does it have any advantages? Not really. Does it look cool? Yeah, that's probably it. This is based on a piece that was found after the Battle of Castillon. So I think much later, obviously not immediately after the battle, but I think it was when they pulled up all of those swords back in the 70s. And I think it came with that lot. A Quillon dagger. Massive, massively long, big, you know, fits your hand well. But the other thing about it is thick like that, that the blade is actually just a hint thicker than the guard itself. It's massive. Everything about this is massive. Yeah, it's got cutting edges on it, but it's not about cutting. This is about stabbing. This is about as fighty a fighty dagger as you could possibly get. It's a nice piece, but it's going to be tiring to wear because it is a tank. Next up, I've got a question for you. Let's see who knows it. What do these two daggers have in common? No. They're both German. Yeah, that's not it. No. They're both, well, early 16th century, Holbein, Durer. Now, this one is not actually by Holbein. This is just the standard form of a baselard, or Swiss baselard, or Swiss German baselard. Appropriated later on, obviously, by the Nazis, so it becomes the SAS dagger, that sort of hilt form here. It's much older than them. And this was a popular dagger form that was kicking around when Holbein was there. He did what a lot of poor and destitute artists did, is he made designs for them. And so there are fantastic ones. There's a very good one in the Wallace, actually. Probably a reproduction, maybe not. But fantastic designs of Holbein dagger, as they have now been called. Back in the day, if they had a name at all, it would have been a baselard. But it's a really interesting form. This one is sort of undecorated, and so wouldn't have been worked on by him. But it's often called a Holbein dagger. This one was by Durer. Now this one gets much more interesting, because I look at this and I would say, if I didn't know better, it looks like a science fiction piece, fantasy piece. This is nothing to do with 16th century Germany, Europe. But it is. And there was a catalogue book of Durer's where he did loads of knife designs, because presumably he just wants to make money too. And so as a customer, you go down there and you flick through his book and you go, I like that one, and he arranges to get it made, and wham, bam, you end up with something there. Now, this was not based on a museum piece. I don't know of any of those which ever got to a museum, but this is from the catalogue. And so, is it a knife that ever existed? Maybe, maybe not. Is it a knife that could have existed? Yeah, absolutely, because it was in his catalogue of available designs. Our next dagger is a dirk. Now, it's often said that they're made from cut down sword blades. I sort of struggle a little bit with that theory. Maybe they are, I can't ever tell you. But what I can tell you is that they're usually quite long, and they're also quite robust. But the other thing that is really notable about dirks, and is a really good and interesting point about them, is look at that handle. 2 inches, 5 centimetres long. Now, every single person out there, and I promise you this, unless they're into dirks, will tell me that that's wrong. How can you hold a 2 centimetre handle, 2 inch handle? But you can, because your hand goes all the way up to the top of the pommel and pretty much down to the blade, more or less. It goes onto the haunches here. And so actually this grip, which is big enough for a small child, really, is not really the grip. It's just one of those funny little things. And so, you know, when you see them with great big, particularly guilty on reenactors, great big grips, it's just not right. Your hand encloses it, holds it tightly, you absolutely know where your edge is because of the alignment with the haunches here on the guard. It's a really good, secure way of holding your knife, but not if you've got a massively long cylindrical handle. Next up is another baselard. Now, I'm pretty sure this came from the Rothenberg Collection again, actually. May not have done. But very unusual in that it's got a ring at the top here. It's the only one that I've seen like this. Now, the Italians and the English, strangely, loved both of these knife forms. Somebody has suggested perhaps that there was quite a big interaction of mercenaries from England to Italy, and that could have brought that style back. But regardless, the Italians seem to love them. And so you often see knights' effigies and things where they have baselards. There were quite a lot of flamboyant ones as well. Again, very poor and very expensive, and everything in between. Now, this one is sort of like middling status, really, and we've got some nice sort of decorative rivet plates here. But again, absolutely characterised by this very curious ring at the top. So, unique? Dunno. Very rare? Definitely. And the next one is a piece from the Museum of London. Now, really interesting. It's roughly contemporary with the one in the Wallace Collection, the big Rondel and Wallace, and the blade is very similar. Hollow ground, single-edged, very, very stout. Hollow rondels, although in this case they're hexagonal and formed a little bit. Slab tang. So there are a lot of parallels here. What's particularly interesting for me about this one is we have these 4 massive tubular rivets through the handle. Really quite unusual. And Fabrice Cognot, another blade maker, excellent blade maker, over in France, said he thinks that there's one there. But then also a lady called Toria, who I don't know, but she posted me a picture of a dagger with hollow rivets that she found, again, contemporary to this, in London around about 8 years ago, something like that, in a dig. Very, very similar in terms of the rivets through the handle. But what I can't show you on this is something I haven't done. And it's something that makes no sense to me at all, which is actually why I didn't do it. But you go look at the original in the museum in London and you think, well, that's a knife. Lovely. I understand that. But look at it closer, because the slab tang is actually at 90 degrees to the blade, which makes no sense at all. And I've checked this again and again because I cannot believe that I'm right, but I am certain that I am. So if you imagine that the blade comes up and then it goes through 90 degrees and the slab tang is set at 90 degrees to the blade edge. I simply don't get it. The only thing that I think that would do is make your very strong blade considerably weaker. I don't know. Any theories out there? You let me know. Any other knives like that you've seen? You let me know, because it's a curious one. Right. Super Swish. So this is based on a piece, I think, in the Bargello in Italy. But either way, it came out of an Italian book of mine. I haven't actually, for this video, I should have done, but I haven't looked it up. Horn and ebony grip, pierced through with a gilded tube inside, and all these fittings are gilded as well. And then a really stout, the blade's a bit different on the original, a really stout single-edged blade with a reinforced tip. Because the blade actually on the Bargello one is a little longer, but this whole hilt style here is really, really Burgundian in style. And the Burgundian rondels very often have quite short blades, so I decided to put a shorter blade on it. But it's a really interesting piece, and it's a bit of a challenge. When you get your head around it, not too bad. But yeah, I mean, it's super swanky, and it's always nice, you know, as a maker, to make something that's really flash sometimes. And the next here we have a little Quillon dagger. Now, the dagger itself is a nice dagger, but unremarkable in many ways. Although actually the octagonal pommel is not very normal, but late 14th century thing. But the sheath itself is covered in stamp work decoration. Now, that's quite interesting, because if you look at carved work, that can take quite a long time, but anybody can do the carved work. You only need a knife and a little bone or wooden point. To make these, you need carefully made stamps. So anything which has been stamped, if you look through the books, anything which has been stamped, that means the decoration has been done by a professional. It's been done by the cordwainer, the sheath maker. If it's not stamped, then it's much harder to tell who it was. It could have been a gifted amateur, and some of the scabbards you see in the books are definitely not by gifted amateurs. You can make some horrible things. And I had a wonderful commission years ago where a man specifically asked for a bollock dagger with a carving on it that looked like the guy had done it when he was drunk in an alehouse, and that was my brief, to do effectively a really bad carving. Landsknecht piece again, private collection if I remember rightly, but a really peculiar handle here. And your first thought is, my goodness, that is just so uncomfortable. Actually, it's the usual story. It completely crushes your fist between the guard and the top of the pommel. Absolutely nobody's taking this knife out of my hand unless I want to let go. Reinforced tip, but again, that very Landsknecht thing of a half guard. So it looks like, and you might be thinking in a museum, if you couldn't see the back properly, that actually the back guard is just broken off, because that's what it looks like. It's not. But getting back to the comfort and discomfort of grips, it's always an interesting point, because a dagger like this is not a hammer. It's not a carpenter's hammer that he uses for 8 hours a day, every day, and has to be comfortable. This is used for a moment, 3 moments, 20 seconds, once a month. It doesn't have to be comfortable. What it does do every single day is display wealth and taste and status on the user's belt. And so actually its importance as an item, and it's true with any dagger, and its importance as an item is also inherent in it just being worn and being there. It's not just, and therefore what it looks like, it's not just its use. Another lovely little Landsknecht piece, I would guess here. Again, you've got sort of a half guard, or in this case, it hasn't even pretended that it's broken off the other side like the others have. So it's a standard kind of a nagel. But that very sweeping flare at the top and a very skinny handle, really quite typically Landsknecht again. But yeah, a nice piece. And then the last. So this is, well, partly a fancy of mine, really. I just wanted to do something that was quite startling. So this is single-edged blade again, Nice English Rondel dagger hilt. And then we go up for this stacked bone and horn grip. And they're both cheap materials, so they're not, it's not an enormously expensive piece, and it wouldn't have been back then. But you see this stacking of materials. I can't think of one like this on a Rondel, but you see this stacking of materials on eating knives particularly, all the way through from the 1200s going through into the 1700s. So that technique of stacking materials and using that contrast is absolutely there. And then just a little pommel cap, just clinched on top, and it just finishes the whole piece off really nicely. So it's a bit of a hard one to date because it was more of a whim and a fancy of mine. But I think you could probably get away with early 15th century on it. But in honesty, it's more just a beautiful piece than anything else. Anyway, thank you very much. So that is my probably overlong tour through 20-something different daggers with a little bit about everything. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you again next time. Thank you.